New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Dr. Ken Gordon, and I'm here to speak today on Physical Perfection by Dr. Holmes from the Science of Mind textbook. It's one of the most contentious things that I find that people find and run into is the reflection that we have on how that matches our belief system and what we do with it and how we do it. Our basic consideration is that behind all illness, behind all effect, there is a mind cause that fits there, a mental equivalent or an idea, that belief system that we hold on to, that we retain, a spiritual prototype that reflects itself into our physical condition and into the world around us and everything that occurs and everything that happens. And I can't tell you how many times I have been in discussion with others who find that that is extremely hard for them to be able to fathom and to believe and to hold on to. And in addition, it's not just what others think about it or how they think about it. It also is how I myself sometimes perceive it and look at it. I find it extremely difficult sometimes to believe that there is a mental causation within my mind that actually reflects itself into a physical form in my body. And it's taken me years, if not decades, to be able to wrap my head around it to a degree that I understand and appreciate the fact that it is absolutely manifesting, that it's absolutely creating a cause which creates an illness or a disease or a sickness or any other thing that might show up, whether it's positive or negative. I remember and recall, I've got three favorite books that are in metaphysics. I should say four, because the Science of Mind textbook, of course, is one that's totally transformed my life. But the other three that I have are, one is written by Raymond Charles Barker. It's called The Power of Decision. The other one was written by Eric Butterworth, and it's called Spiritual Economics. And the third one that I read when I was first beginning and starting out was by Walter Starkey, and the book was called Homesick for Heaven. I don't believe that one's in print anymore. He kind of encapsulated it into It's All God. But I share this with you because these are the things that really took me over the top in my belief system to be able to try and attempt to change my mind about certain things and see whether or not the manifestation was different in what occurred and what happened with it. In Raymond Charles Barker's book, The Power of Decision, one of the things that I found in it, one of the little things that I gleaned out of it, was this statement that he had in there that he believed that all colds, for example, were created by confusion. And that the way to be able to heal yourself of congestion and of a cold or congestion of thought is to make a decision, even if the decision, of course, is to decide not to decide at that particular point. So I've always found it fascinating when I began to exercise and to do it, to find that it actually had a manifestation, that it actually created a healing or a wholeness within me when I began to realize that. So for the last 35 years, whenever I found myself with a common cold in my life, I have began to look within myself to find out what decision I'm not making and what is required. And the minute that I can put my finger on it, the minute that I can choose to do that, what happens is the cold dissipates and goes away. Now, I know that this is extremely hard for some people to wrap their head around, and I know it's the truth for me too. Years and years ago, when I first became a spiritual mind practitioner out of Palm Desert, California, I was given a mentor teacher that worked with me, and that we got together and we did certain things. And one of the things that we did was we worked with one of Raymond Charles Barker's most famous students, Louise Hay. And Louise Hay, as some of you may or may not know, wrote the book, You Can Heal Your Life. And it is the absolute clearest method and way that I know that I have found that determines what our physical condition is and how it reflects on our mental anguish or our mental thinking and how it works. To this very day, I have an app on my phone that's a Louise Hay You Can Heal Your Life app, which I check out on a regular basis if something happens or something occurs, if my back hurts or if something goes on, so that I can at least begin and start with the idea that there's something that I could change within my thinking that might change the physical result within my body. When we talk about physical perfection, Holmes believed that what we are perfect beings, and that the only thing that veils us or prevents us from being able to see or experience it is our own mental thoughts, our own neuroses, our own belief systems that reflect out into the world and create a physical form. And within ourselves, what we see that on a regular basis. And there have been many, many books that have been written on the determination of what the cause behind something is. And they're all generalities and they don't necessarily all fit. But I'll share with you, they mostly fit. I first discovered it when I was teaching You Can Heal Your Life with my mentor, a practitioner that I was with. And we put on a class, and there was a couple hundred people there. It showed up. It was big, and it was a wonderful experience and something great to be part of. But I remember when people used to walk into the room, we had affirmation cards that we would hand out to them. And I can remember, I did it about 3 times, and they were 10-week courses each time. So I spent the better part of a year playing around with this every Tuesday night for 3 hours. And I can recall when I'd hand out the affirmation cards, I'd always take one for myself. And as the people came in after a few weeks, you began to get to know them. So you'd hand them a card, and the card would say something on it, and they'd look at it and they'd say, and you knew immediately, knowing them as well as you did, that it reflected on something that they believed and that it was probably fairly pertinent to their life or what was going on. And that's fine and dandy. But every time I drew a card, it never made any sense to me. As soon as I drew it, it said, no, this isn't true about me. No, this isn't true about me. No, this isn't true about me. And it took me a while to understand that if it worked for everybody else, why wouldn't it work for me? So that I could begin to look at it from a concentrated method, so that I could actually begin to take the actions and the activity. And once I began to do that, what I began to discover is, even though I didn't believe that what was being fed to me was the truth, as I began to look at it, I could see that there was tentacles of that truth that kind of resided within what was being stated and what was being said. And I began to utilize it so that I could see what was going on. There's an old saying that life leaves clues. And when they're delivered to you, when they're put forward for you, if you take advantage of them, you can begin to move forward with it. The other thing I discovered in that class was exactly how much mind had control over the physical form of humanity. It surprised me sometimes, as a matter of fact. People used to come into the class, and they'd come into the course, and we were well connected with the local hospitals. So we had quite a few people who came in believing that they had a terminal diagnosis which they had to deal with, beginning to see that they had something serious going on. I remember that we had this was the heights of the HIV/AIDS situation. So we did a lot of work with that. And you may or may not know that Dr. Louise did an awful lot of work in the 80s around the AIDS conditions and what was going on and the healing of it. by transforming the belief system within human beings as to their own value and their own worth. And I found that it was extremely fascinating. I recall on more than one occasion people coming in, and when they come in for the first class and they know nothing about the teaching, and they sit down, you begin to talk to them. And if they have something terminal, for example, I can remember a couple of cases where people had cancer, and they would show up and they would come into the class, and you'd begin by asking them what they thought about this physical ailment that they were showing in their life. And, inevitably what they would do is they would fall back on the positive, which is a wonderful thing to do, and is probably way better than falling on the negative. But there's certain fears that were wrapped around it that you could feel and you could sense. But you'd say, well, what do you think about this cancer that's in your body? And they would say, oh, well, everything I've read said that it's going to be a divine outpicturing, that I'm going to learn from it, that this will be one of the highlights of my life, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, they would go with a party line, and they would go with it. And I have to admit that was a very accurate statement. And it was good for them to be able to do that. But the second night they would come in, the second week they would show up, you'd ask them the same question. You'd say, well, what do you think about this? And you may or may not get the same answer back again. But inevitably, what would happen during the process of the work that we were doing, they're opening up to what their real feelings were, what was really going on, what was really happening within them. You would inevitably come to a point where you would ask them what they felt about it. And they would become really honest. And when they became honest, the healing would begin. When you ask them, what do you think about that cancer that is eating away at your breast or your lung or whatever part? Inevitably, as they got to trust you and know you better, they would come forward with the answer. And the answer would be, I hate it. I hate it. It's destroying me. It's eating me from the inside out. I think about it all the time. There's something in me that's devouring me. And then you could move forward. Then we had the door open where you could say, And you begin to be able to look at the mental cause behind what was going on. What was feeding this thing that was inside them. Where it was getting its energy from, where it was developing, where it was moving forward. And once we discovered that, then you could begin to say and determine the truth, which Holmes says in the textbook so clearly, is that you have to be able to embrace the goodness of who you are in everything you do. Now we're talking about physical perfection. And it works for mental perfection. It works in every aspect of our life, our health, our wealth, our creative expression, our loving relationships. It fits into every one of those situations in perfection. The life we lead, the life we have, the life we experience is the life that we are constructing within our own mind and how we view it and how we look at it. And the healing aspect, the quantum step into that healing, it really comes from within each of us as individuals to be able to look at it and to be able to understand that everything needs energy, and that the energy that it gets derives from us, that we feed it. We're the ones who are putting it in. I don't know whether or not you're experienced in this enough that you realize that your energies within your own body actually develop the conditions. You might be fearful of money. You might be fearful of love. You might be fearful of physical problems or issues. And when you are, what happens is, and what Holmes puts in there, not in so many words, but you can read into it, it's necessary to take the energy off of that and to transmute that energy. My experience is that which I hate seems to have so much energy that gets put into it. That which I love also has a lot of energy being put into it, and the loving energy is certainly healing, and it's way more powerful than the hatred. At least it appears to be. But we can feed our neuroses, we can feed our physical conditions with what we think about it. So teaching the You Can Heal Your Life course, what I discovered was that once somebody came forward and they said, I hate this. I hate this thing inside of me. Then it allowed the door to be open to understand that what they were hating was themselves. What they were hating was a part of their experience and a part of their life. What they were hating was something within themselves that belonged to them, that it was real, and that it was established and built on their own self-esteem, their own belief system, and where they get their value from and how it works. So it opens the door for the possibility and the potential to be able to transform that. And that's what we did. The whole exercise, the whole course was about how to love yourself. It was about how to understand and appreciate that which exists within your physical form, that which exists within your health, wealth, creative expression, loving relationship, really derives from what you feel about it and the attitude and the energies that you put towards it. You know, there's a Thomas Troward talked about a living idea in the mind of God. You and I and everyone else is a living idea in the mind of God, everything else. And that living idea in the mind of God is something that derives its power and its energy, if in a natural form. It derives it from spirit itself. It doesn't derive it from ourselves. But we have the ability, through our ability to be able to think, to feed that which we don't want. The old story of the black dog and the white dog. Which one are you feeding? And often what we're doing is we're feeding something that we don't like and we don't care for and that we don't want. We don't even know we're doing it. We don't even come in contact with the realization that what we're doing is we're creating and building with the energy of our life something within ourselves or something in our lives that we don't choose to have. And we do it by feeding. It doesn't matter whether it's a negative energy feeding it or whether it's a positive energy feeding it. So in the You Can Heal Your Life course, what I discovered that so many people who would come in with ailments were actually entering in with their own energy source to keep it moving and keep it going. It wasn't a living idea in the mind of God. It was a living idea in the mind of the individual. And in my particular case, it's not the living idea of the mind of God. It's the living idea of the mind of Kenn. And oftentimes what I can do is I can blow things into dimensions that they don't even deserve to have. They don't belong there because it's not the truth of them. So when we hate something within ourselves, what we're doing is we're feeding it. And feeding it makes us tired because it takes energy to create the energy, to create the ailment, to create the dysfunction, to create the distraction. And as we pour that energy into it, that energy saps out of us. There's a reason why hospitals are filled with beds. People are tired when they go into the hospital because the ailment they think is making them tired. The reality is that they are feeding something that doesn't need to exist. But they're feeding something out of their own being and their own power. I'll go back to Thomas Troward. A living idea in the mind of God attracts to it everything that is required and everything that is necessary for it to be able to exist and be in the highest point. And what we find ourselves with is we find ourselves sometimes taking the lowest point, working on the lowest point in order to be able to do it. But that's not the energy of the universe that's doing it. It's the energy of the individual that's feeding it. I've been through enough businesses where as an entrepreneur in my younger years, I would develop and build a business, and I would think this was the greatest thing in the world, and I would work at it 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I just pour myself into it. And eventually, what I would do is I would become bored with it. When I became bored with it, what would happen is it would still demand my energy. And my fear would always be, boy, gosh, if I didn't do this, then it would disappear. It would go away. And I don't want it to go away because it's my business, even though I don't want to do it anymore. And here's the truth. The truth is that that's a living idea in my mind. It's not a living idea inside the mind of God. So I'll share, when we started our own church here, when we started the center, I determined, I'd already learned that lesson. And so I determined that this was this center, the Center for Spiritual Living Kelowna, that my wife and I founded, was a living idea in the mind of God. And I would not allow it to be fed off my energy, that I would let it be fed off the energy of the universe itself. Therefore, I had to be really clear in what I did and how I did it. I had to make sure that the principles and the values that were put forward were principles and values that were universal, that weren't identified or weren't individualistic to my desires or my wants. That's what the science of mind is all about. The science of mind is all about bringing forward an idea that already exists. Most of us who hear it and come in contact with it and see it, what we do is we resonate with something in it. It's a resonation. It's not something that's been created or something that's been given to you. It's something that you resonate with because it already exists within you. And so we're constantly awakening people to the reality and the realization. I'll go back to the You Can Heal Your Life course that I was teaching. In the You Can Heal Your Life course that I was teaching, people were feeding their own issues. They were feeding it with their sense and their energy of dislike, of hatred. What do you think about that ailment in your life? What do you think about how little money you have? What do you think about? What do you think about? What do you think about? I hate it. It's destroying me. I don't have enough money. My physical form isn't right. I hate being in relationship because I'm always hurt. Those are the beliefs that construct what goes on. So when someone comes into a course like that and they have cancer, let's say, or they're diagnosed with cancer, and you ask them, what do you think about that? And when they're honest and they come forward and they say, I hate this, you know exactly where you need to go to remove the energy. You can't afford to hate your life. What you need to do is you need to find ways to be able to embrace it, to be able to live with it, to be able to accept it. You have to realize that your first statement, that this is a gift from God, is true. And all you need to do in order to have it go away is to stop hating it and stop feeding it. Instead, to begin to give it the energy of love and understand that it's part and parcel of who you are. And once you begin to do that, the healing begins. Now, of the hundreds of people that we dealt with, we discovered that after about week 6, if they had the aha and they were honest and truthful, and we began to look at the mental equivalent behind what was going on in their bodies, and we began to be able to transform that mental equivalent from self-hatred into self-love, that what would happen is that they would go to their doctors and they'd come back and they'd say, I'm in remission. They said it's a miracle. They can't find out. They can't find out where it is anymore. They say, I don't need chemo anymore. I'm not making this up. I was astounded as anybody is. But it's the truth. Just like when I get a common cold and I discover that there is a decision that I haven't made and I make the decision, the cold goes away. Behind everything, there is a mental causation. The mental causation doesn't come from the world around you. It isn't a pandemic of things that are happening around you, outside of you. It is what you think, what you feel, what you feed, how you work it within your own being and within your own self. This is what Dr. Holmes talks about. He talks about how you can reflect the perfection of who you are and the attitude of how you look at it. That doesn't mean that maybe perhaps you don't have aches and pains, but that's a normal way of being. That's a normal thing to have in life. It's not abnormal. It's how you view it that becomes the problem. Years ago, well, not that many, maybe 15, 20, I was a ski patroller, a volunteer ski patroller at our local mountain. God only knows how I got there, because you had to be a good skier, and that wasn't me, but I did make it. And I remembered on the first day of the first shift that I was supposed to have, they had a training. And I was in the training and I was skiing down the hill. And as I'm skiing down the hill, what happened was I caught an edge and I pulled the ligaments inside one of my legs in the back of my knee. And so I was out for what they said was going to be the whole season, which was a little disappointing because I'd worked really hard doing all the medical training in order to be able to get into this. So I ripped all the ligaments in the back, and I was basically on crutches. And I can remember that my wife would come into the bedroom in the morning when I was getting up, and she would say, "How are you feeling today?" And I would say, "Oh, God, my leg hurts so much. Oh, it's so painful." And then one day when she came in, I went to open my mouth and give her my standard answer, and I suddenly realized what I was doing. And instead, what I said was actually what I thought, and what I reacted to was, actually, my leg does hurt, but my hands feel good. My head feels good. My shoulders feel good. My body actually feels really, really good. What I was doing was I was focusing all the energy of my life into a little strain and a little pull in my leg. Very, very small. The minute that I stopped concentrating on that and started concentrating on the goodness that exists throughout the rest of my life, throughout the rest of my body, I healed. Matter of fact, I healed in a 6-week period of time, so that I was up patrolling and skiing within 6 weeks. It's little things like that that prove the principle for me. And as Dr. Holmes said in the Science of Mind textbook, it's not up to us to just believe it. It's up to us to prove it. It's up to us to own it, to bring it into our own life and our own being, to be able to make it so for us. And that's pretty much and primarily what I've done, or what I've tried to do in my life. And there are still times that I miss the boat on it. But I teach my students that the consciousness that I want to have, the consciousness that I want to be able to develop, and I'm not saying that I have it, I'm not saying that I'm there on it, but the consciousness that I desire is to have the consciousness where if I were to step off a curb and twist my ankle, instead of jumping up and down and screaming and crying and saying, "Oh my God, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Now I'm going to be on crutches. Now this, you know the story. You've been there." I want to have the consciousness that the first thing I do when that happens is to say, "Thank you, God." To be able to accept it immediately, to be able to embrace it immediately as the truth of my being, instead of something that I hate, or something that I don't want, or something that's terrible that's happening to me. Instead, to realize that it actually is something good that's come into my life that's happening through me. I believe that that's true for every aspect of our life. I've seen it work thousands of times in my life and thousands of times in other people's lives. When we begin to realize that we're part of the flow of the universe, that we're part of life itself, and we begin to allow the minutia, and that truly is what it is, the minutia, to fall away and instead realize just how divine, how beautiful, how brilliant, and what a miracle we are, then what happens is the healing begins to happen. So I've stopped hating myself. I've stopped hating my body, even as I age. Instead, I begin to nurture an attitude that really reflects what I want, as opposed to what I'm frightened I have or what I'm frightened I might get. I begin to look at it from a point of view of the divinity of life itself, realizing and understanding that I am a living idea in the mind of God, that there is a spiritual force that is bringing me forward into enlightenment, into understanding, into appreciation, into love, into light. And everything that happens and everything that occurs happens for a reason that is divine and good. And if I manage to bypass feeding my fears, what happens is that everything comes to a healing, to a wholeness. Whether it be a cancer, or whether it be a COVID, or whether it be a cold, or whether it be lack, or whether it be loneliness, that when we begin to accept life on its own terms, life gives back to us everything that's required, just the way Thomas Troward said that it should be. A living idea in the mind of God derives all of its energy from the universe itself, not from within the mind of the thing that is being created. This is a huge step forward. Louise Hay, over the term of her life, healed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. She brought forward some common ideas, some common understandings and appreciations of life itself. I would recommend that you get the app and that you take a look at it. I use it about once every week, either on myself or with somebody else. When something comes forward, I look it up. And you don't even need that, because you can figure it out for yourself. Just like Barker talked about in The Power of Decision with the common cold, meaning you need to make a decision to remove the congestion of your mind. You can determine in your life what's going on, and you can heal it. You can bring it to wholeness by beginning to embrace it as opposed to trying to push it away. This concept and this idea is one which can transform the world. It's one that can bring us into alignment with who we truly are. I don't want you to think about this in terms of spirit or God being something that you can play with. Instead, what I want you to realize is that your life is created by yourself and the energy that you put into it. And if you're having problems right now, if you're having an issue right now in your life, then you're listening to the right talk. And if you allow your cynicism to fall by the wayside and actually begin to utilize it and use it, what you're going to find is you open yourself to a potential of healing and of joy. We were born for the purpose of manifesting. Our problem is we don't always know what we want to manifest. So be clear on what it is that you want, and feed what you want and stop feeding what you don't want. When you do that, you construct an uncommon life, a life of joy, of happiness, of love, of prosperity, of energy, and of physical health. It works in every area. Thank you for being with me today. God bless you. Know you're loved. Now I'll open up for some questions. Last week we had Reverend LZ speaking on the same subject, and next week we've got Reverend Michelle Wadley who's coming up, who's going to sum this all up for us and tie it all in a bow, which she's so good at. So if there are any questions, just bring them forward and we'll go with it. Okay, you say the mind of God. What is God? Is God a personal entity? I know that God is in everything, but can you develop a personal relationship with this entity if it's an entity? First off, there's a good reason why Dr. Holmes called it the thing itself. We unfortunately are bound by language, which is symbolic. And the language that we use and utilize sometimes doesn't fit into everything. When I say a living idea in the mind of God, what I'm talking about is a living idea within the universal infinite mind that we are all part of. Can you have a personal relationship with it? You do have a personal relationship with it. It's who you are right now. Your relationship with yourself is that. And your relationship with the world around you is actually a reflection of your relationship with yourself. So you can't win one way or the other. It's going to show up within you. How we see the world is through our own filters. And the reality is that we create the filters. We really do. We lay them out in front of us and we see it, whether it's politics, political, whatever it is, what's happening in the world, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening and what's going on is actually a direct reflection of what we expect to see, and it shows up. And so the answer is yes, you have a personal relationship with the entity, if it is an entity, which it isn't, and that personal relationship is your relationship with yourself. Start treating yourself like the divine, and that's what you deserve. Anything else? Oh, what a great question. Can you heal someone who's sedated? Yeah, I'd say so. I remember during boring classes, if one were to nod off, my teacher Dr. Tom Costa would say, "That's okay, I'll get you. You'll get it anyway. It'll come to you." You aren't necessarily your conscious mind, although that's how you create form. Can you bring somebody who's sedated to wholeness? Somebody who's sedated is already whole. So can you make that can they understand that? I don't know. Here's what I do know, though. I know that the universal mind is not dependent upon the individual mind. Therefore, it can operate in perfection whether or not it's known or not known. Everything is part of that universal mind. I'm sitting on a chair right now and I'm part of the chair. It melds together. There doesn't need to be consciousness to have healing. It's like saying you need to be conscious to be whole. The reality is, no, you don't. What you need to do is be whole. So I would say, yes, you can. I would surmise that you can heal a sedated individual. Oh yes. I'd open my app and look at it. I'm hypertension. Yeah. I'm glad I was here to give the message. It's all there. And I'm not saying it's all in you can heal your life. It's all within you and me. We know. Here's one of the things that I do. If I can't figure out why something's going on in my life that's creating conflict or issues within it, I treat for the answer. I stop treating to heal what was going on or what's happening in my life. Instead, what I say is, something along the lines of, I believe in God and absolutely nothing else, or I believe in the divine intelligence and absolutely nothing else. And I open myself right now to the higher and the greater power within me to be able to receive everything I need to know. I always know what I need to know when I need to know it, and I am now receptive to that. And then what happens from that point forward is, as I move forward in my life, everything suddenly begins to make sense. The answers come, the answers show up, and so I can see what it is. So if something were to going on in my life, if I had stomach issues, for example, and I couldn't figure out where they came from or why it happened, perhaps what I would do is do my own spiritual mind treatment within myself, and I would simply say, I recognize and know that that answer comes to me smoothly and easily, and I am committed and willing to be able to hear it. And then all of a sudden, everything starts showing up. It's the way our minds work. We have it within us to know everything we need to know. Why not? You're a living idea in the mind of that entity. That entity is infinite. So are you. Okay, so the question is about somebody whose brother died. The question is, are you saying I could have healed them? The answer is no. And I don't want that to sound so cold. The point I'm trying to make is that we don't heal other people, and we don't heal things outside of ourselves. We heal what's within us. The very use of spiritual mind treatment is based on being in connection and contact with the infinite. And when you're in contact with the infinite, what you know can be known everywhere at any time in any place. But that doesn't mean that that there isn't a bigger thing that's happening or going on with it. We have a tendency in this teaching to say you're perfect, whole, and complete. I add a little codicil to that: is you're perfect, whole, and complete, and I can heal that too. Because the reason I say that is because it automatically sets up the concept that there's something broken within you in the first place. So I'm sorry for your brother, for your loss. But there is a pathway. We've sometimes say in this teaching that our transition or our death is actually the healing. I'll tell you a story which really, I probably cried during it, but when my mother, who was a practitioner, a spiritual mind practitioner, was sick in the hospital, I went to visit her one day, and she said something along the lines of, "Kenny, I'm so tired. I'm just so tired of this." And I said, "Well, Mom, do you want me to treat for you?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, what would you like me to treat for?" And she said, "I want release from the pain." And I looked at her, and she looked at me, and I said, "Are you willing to accept that?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And because I'm her son and because I loved her so deeply, I said, "Do you realize what this might mean?" And she said, "Yep, I do." I said, "Okay." So I gave her a treatment, and within 6 hours, she'd made her transition. She was willing and accepting, and it was the divine pathway for her, and it was a requirement. And I miss her dearly, but that was her choice. And and it wasn't I prayed her to death. What it was her healing took place. She no longer had the pain. She got what she wanted. So, can you heal? Am I saying you could heal your brother? No, your brother can heal your brother if he's receptive to the healing truth that is spoken out. Next question. Yes, creative flow is. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I just want you to know this. I want you to know that residing within you is the answer to anything that's going on. It's a requirement that we release and surrender something rather than try to build something or develop something when it comes to this. The requirement is that we change our mind, that we get a bigger idea than the one that we've had before. And that anything that we fear, anything that shows up in our life that is untowards what our beliefs is or what our expectation is of life, is in reality there for a purpose. And the purpose it's there for is not to give us a lesson. The purpose it is there for is to awaken us to the magnificence that's truth of who we are. It's to awaken us to the realization that we are enough and that we are complete no matter what. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be here. You know, we live in a world that we know through education that everything that exists on this plane exists for a purpose. That even gnats and ants are here for a reason. And we believe that and we hold that to be true for everything outside of ourselves except our own selves as individuals or the human race. That is a misnomer. Everything is here, including you, for a purpose and a reason. And when we make the reason our cause d'etre, what occurs for us is that everything that is required is fed back into us, because then that is fulfilling our mission on this plane. So have a wonderful morning and a great week, and tune in next week for Reverend Michelle Wadley.